Hi there. Today I want to talk with you about an article by Simon Gottschalk, Hypermodern Consumption and Megalomania. And of course, this is introducing the idea of hypermodernity. This has been recently developed as opposed to postmodernity. Again, as I mentioned before, some people say postmodernity, roughly 1945, 1950 eras when that begins, runs, some people think, through today. Other people, new theorists, are arguing that we are in a hypermodern moment since 2001. Things perhaps have become even more exaggerated. And these are claims, again, that different theorists can make, but we don't know for sure. We probably won't understand the differences between eras until we're long past them. Anyway, to talk about some of Gottschalk's ideas here, he wants to look at advertisements. And the starting point is the ubiquity of advertisements today. That means their constant presence, that we are bombarded with them. They are inescapable. Commercial messages abound. When you go driving, you see them on signs all over the place, flashing billboards. You see them on bumper stickers, and you see them on cars themselves, which display the make and the model of the vehicle on the car. That didn't used to be the case. You see advertisements on clothing, you see them in any newspaper or magazine you read, you see them on the World Wide Web, on the radio, and some estimates are that the average American consumes 3,000 ads per day. Now that's exposure to ads. That doesn't necessarily mean they see them in their pure focus, and that's the average. Some places, if you, for example, live in New York City, you might be exposed to thousands more, other places a little less. But it is unmistakable that today advertisements are very, very prominent and prevalent. As I said a minute ago, commercials are colonizing many media formats, and that especially involves the World Wide Web. That was not a commercial enterprise initially. Now it's very difficult to come across web pages that don't have some type of ad content. So as I said, inescapable, constant advertisement these days, and the ads, the logic of them, is sending a clear message that the route toward personal happiness is achieved through a product or a service that's being advertised. Simon Gottschalk has noted that many bits of research have focused on visual elements of ads. He says that it might be useful to consider as well the use of language in advertisements. And what he does is a good move if you're a sociologist or you're interested in doing research. He basically says, in the literature review, these are the types of studies that are overrepresented, and I want to add to those studies with this type of study. So he's saying, okay, this is the hole that needs to be filled in the research. Here I'm going to try to do that. His focus is on what are called superlatives. And these are statements that are used to convey the superiority of something. And they express things like excess or exaggeration. And you see these kinds of things all the time in contemporary advertisements, especially televisual advertisements. In personal life, too, you may encounter them. You may have a friend who says, that movie is epic. Epic means lasts throughout the ages, will withstand the test of time. Is it truly epic? I don't know. Maybe that's an exaggeration. Some people might say a car was unbelievably fast. Well, is that really true? Was it unbelievably fast, or is that an overstatement that doesn't really find support? Gottschalk says that the increased reliance on superlatives in our advertising culture and in individual ads today is linked to hypermodernism. And hypermodernism, as I have here, is a recently developed concept, and it's primarily coming from French social theorists. Some of the key names of these are Giles Lipovetsky, Nicole Orbet, and Asher. So a few different theorists who are starting to use this term to describe contemporary life and the characteristics of it. Albert, to give one example, thinks that hypermodernity is different from postmodernity through the idea of hypermodern's emphasis on excess, urgency, intensity, and things like instant gratification. It seems like the speed of contemporary life is increasing. It seems like people want things more urgently. There's a greater intensity of feeling in advertisements and in people's desires, perhaps. People are increasingly distracted and want instant gratification. So one of the key notions within that work, her work, is that excess seems to be key. There's excessiveness in many, many aspects of contemporary life, and that this excessiveness is only increasing. Think, for example, if you will, maybe about Facebook. In the past, people would be able to say, oh, you know, I have, I don't know, a few dozen friends maybe. Today, people claim hundreds of friends, for example, on one social media site. Gauss Lipovetsky is the next theorist that Gottschalk considers. And Lipovetsky argues for 3 phases of consumption to see a change that we can have evident today. He says the first phase is roughly 1880s to World War I, which is 1918. And he says this involved the idea of mass production and mass marketing generally. This was a first important phase of consumption that set the stage for phase 2. In the 1950s to the 1980s, you see more hedonism and seduction being presented in advertisements, and an emphasis on increasing individualism, and also conspicuous consumption. People buying labels for lifestyles that they presumably have, advertisements geared toward marketing to people who are, say, for example, interested in fitness, so they would connect with Nike, or they want to associate with winners like Michael Jordan or Tiger Woods, and so they purchase Nike products. The third phase of consumption for Lipovetsky takes place starting in the 1990s and up to today. And this is the idea consumption has colonized every social sphere. So at one point the market was somewhat separable from things like the church, the educational system, family relations. And colonized, of course, means sort of taking over, creeping into. So the idea Lipovetsky's arguing is this type of thing, consumption, market relationships, infiltrates everything. Family relationships, religion, education, all other spheres. And it promotes a sort of experiential and emotional-based consumption. That again marks it as something different from the past. I mentioned a little bit of this with the article that I wrote with David Dickens, Build-A-Bear, and you could also see it perhaps in some elements of the Hard Rock Hotel and Casino. This, Gottschalk is arguing, is even ramping up more with hypermodernity. Also, too, phase 3 is hyper-individualistic. And as an example, I think I've said this in the past, in my youth, we had one phone at the house and everybody had to use it. In today's world, most people of adult age have their own cell phone and their own personal computer. So the privatization of things, people have individualistic meals for themselves, TV dinners, etc. So hyper-individualism rules today. And these days we see an emphasizing of immediacy. In advertisements, you see it through demands like call now, offer ends soon, limited time. And people begin to think, I want that object or service now. You can buy with one click, for example, on Amazon. Some terms that are important to the article. Narcissism is what Gottschalk and some other theorists find characterizing the postmodern era, and that's a feeling of self-involvement and excessive love of the self. Some people believe that today we have electronic narcissism through things like Facebook and Twitter, uploading of the selfie picture, instant information about a person's status, all this stuff. But some argue that we're moving, and Gottschalk argues this, moving toward more of even megalomania. And megalomania is when you think yourself as kind of the center of the world, all important, and that you have delusional fantasies of power. At the extreme end of this, the examples of megalomaniacs might be people like Hitler, Stalin, contemporary example Kim Jong-un, and that perhaps we are moving in this direction where people think themselves so important and are so consumed with their own identities and lives. A theorist that Gottschalk draws from, whose name I'm going to have trouble pronouncing, Digaljiak, I'll say, suggests that we feel some contradictory poles today. To some extent, we want to be both common and uncommon. We also want to be fitting in and also exceptional. And we also today want to be limitless in our pursuits of whatever is possible. You can earn whatever degree you want. You can master whatever field or hobby that you like today. You have endless options. Other examples, the idea that you can achieve or experience anything and everything. You can travel the world. You can enjoy cuisine from all the nations. For example, at a local bar, I believe, that used to have the world tour of beer, where you could go around sampling beers from however many different nations that they had. So this is a characteristic that Digaljiak says is very apparent today. And Gottschalk wants to see how these theoretical ideas can be teased out empirically. How much do they represent, or how much are they in line with the concrete world? So in order to look at that, he considers 98 different TV ads that he says he selects with some intentionality. They are not randomly selected, but he specifically chooses certain ads for a certain purpose to illustrate this trend. And he also looks at 52 web commercials. So the TV ads, you see the timeline of 2005 to 2007, the web commercials, just 2007. To make his argument, Gottschalk draws from an historian, actually a linguist, who lived during World War II, and he was oppressed by the Third Reich. His wife was German, and he was Jewish, but apparently he was able to be safe because his wife had certain connections, and his name was Victor Klemperer, and he wrote about the Nazi uses of language and misuses of language. And in particular, Klemperer focused on Nazis' use of superlatives during Hitler's rule. The Nazis were very keen on things like saying a final solution to the Jewish question, or total solution, or total annihilation. They overused terms like complete, total, absolute, the 1,000-year Reich, the eternal Reich, things being everlasting. So again, sort of gross overstatements characterized the Nazi regime and language they tended to use. Gottschalk then goes through and looks at examples of superlatives you can find in many ads today. And I don't have time to go over all of them. Please make sure you've read the article and you'll be able to see some of these. I'm just going to cherry pick a few as examples. And if you've watched any television recently, you could actually take a notepad and note down how many of these you find regularly. New and improved, these kinds of statements that are always kind of emphasizing more, better, faster, etc. So for Victoria's Secret, you can have the hottest bra of the season. Western Union offers the fastest way to send money, as if someone has measured that. Nissan says it has the most powerful and biggest trucks. And Gottschalk also looks at TV show titles that include superlatives. So things like funniest pets and people, the best damn sports show, period, right? Many commercials and names for products today also rely on superlatives, especially, I don't know why, but I was looking at razors the other day. You can see these with ads for razors, ultra smooth shave, mega power, Powerball, super and maximum are also phrases that you see regularly used in ads to promote a product. There's also a frequent reliance on inflated numbers in many television shows, perhaps in advertisements. Kills 99.9% of all germs, for example, the top 100 videos of all time. And there are, paralleling that, claims that sometimes exaggerate the space over which the items that are being discussed are covering. A great example of this is things like the world's most amazing videos and others. Also, too, you can see exaggerations of time. For example, things claiming that they are the 24/7 news source for the most recently updated information, delivering it to you at the fastest speeds possible. So, in concluding the article, Gottschalk quotes someone named Cournot, who believes that hypermodernity involves a, quote, collusion between the temptation toward excess and the means to achieve it. In other words, we have this idea of, oh, we should want these things, and this notion of this is good, and I deserve this, or need this, or desire it, and here's the way toward it. So this pairing up of those things together for Cournot is the definition of the hypermodern, that we can follow through on our temptations toward excess, and ads promise the way to that end. What Gottschalk wants to be very careful about saying is that superlatives in ads don't mean that we're becoming like Nazis. It's that superlatives in ads are not promoting a totalitarian logic, so like Nazis used in order to promote their regime. Instead, superlatives offer a totalizing logic. So as I said again, kills 99.9% of all germs. It seems to cover all germs, right? The 100 greatest videos of all time. How many more do you need? These kinds of things. So the totalizing logic is saying complete coverage of things like time, space, human needs and desires, and that products and services can cover, solve, involve anything and everything. They offer perfect happiness, complete solutions. The problem with this is that the whole idea of a superlative is overstatement. And Gottschalk quotes Gabriel and Lang at the very end of his article, that consumer hedonism is neither playful nor innocent, that perhaps there is a larger cost or effect that these types of grandiose overstatements will lead to, and that we will experience. They could be psychological costs, and they could certainly be, as Gottschalk says in a footnote, environmental costs. When we consume far more than we need, and we use up natural resources in the environment at a far greater pace than any other peoples in world history, people wonder if it could well be connected with climate change, with substantial levels of pollution rising, with more fires and strange Arctic ice flows and melting. So the consumer hedonism perhaps comes at a cost, and that also too, if you've ever been around a friend who's constantly saying, oh, this was the greatest movie ever. I happen to have a friend who's always stating, oh, that was the best book I ever read. What happens is, is people don't listen to someone who cries wolf all the time, right? So eventually you just start tuning it out. And Gottschalk does say that a society that over-relies on superlatives really might seem to be unsustainable.